What kind of man steps forward when 25 others have already failed? The question hung over Dry Creek Valley, like dust in the morning wind, the day Catherine Sterling made her challenge. The sun had just climbed over the mesa, sending long orange rays across the valley, when her voice rang out clear enough for every man within 20 miles to hear. Folks said it sounded like thunder warning everyone a storm was coming. Catherine Sterling was a widow with a spine stronger than barbed wire and eyes sharp enough to cut through lies. She owned the wildest horse anyone had ever seen. A huge black stallion named Tempest, 17 hands high, proud as a king, and angry at the world. 25 men had tried to ride him. 25 men had been thrown into dirt so hard some couldn't sit for a week. Catherine didn't care about their pride. She wasn't looking for show-offs. She wanted one thing. A real cowboy, someone like her husband had been before sickness took him 3 winters ago. Someone who knew a horse's heart mattered as much as its strength. So she stood on the steps of the general store one Tuesday morning, faced the crowd, and announced in a voice that left no room for laughter, "If you're a real cowboy, prove it on my stallion. Ride him for 10 minutes without being thrown, and I'll give you $50 in gold. If you fail, don't come back to my ranch pretending you're something you're not. $50, enough money to start a new life. Enough to tempt every man with an ounce of courage or stupidity." That very day, the first challenger stepped forward. Tempest showed no mercy. The man lasted 8 seconds before the stallion swung sideways and sent him flying into the fence. The next lasted 15 seconds. The third and fourth barely got a leg over the saddle. By the end of the week, Dry Creek's doctor had treated more broken ribs, bruised backs, and swollen ankles than anyone remembered seeing since the last cattle drive disaster. Still, the men kept coming. Local boys, drifters, and even trained horsemen from neighboring towns. Some tried whips, thinking fear would tame Tempest. Others came with sweet words and sugar cubes. A few brought ropes and strange devices meant to force the stallion into obedience. None of it worked. Tempest was smarter, stronger, and angrier than all of them. He wasn't fighting the saddle. He was fighting the men who thought they had a right to own him. Catherine watched them all from her porch, arms folded, face as calm as stone. Folks whispered she was cruel, letting men get hurt for nothing. Others said she was holding on to her husband's memory too tightly. Because once, right before he died, he had ridden Tempest for 10 full minutes. No bucking, no rearing, just the two of them, moving like one soul in 2 bodies. She had never seen anything like it again. That was why she waited. That was why she kept challenging men who never stood a chance. She believed one day the right cowboy would come along. Someone Tempest would accept. Someone who understood him the way her husband once had. That day came quietly. Miles away in a lonely line shack, a cowboy named Jake Morrison sat beside a dying fire. He was 34, tall, worn down by life, and carrying more ghosts than a man ought to. He spent most days riding fence lines, tending sick cattle, and speaking more to the wind than to other people. Solitude had become a friend he never asked for. He had heard the stories. The wild stallion no man could ride, the widow who dared cowboys to prove themselves, the gold, the failures, the broken bones. But none of that pulled him toward Dry Creek Valley. Something else did. Jake had once been different. Before the war. Before loss hollowed him out. Horses were the only creatures he still trusted. They didn't lie. They didn't betray. They treated you exactly how you treated them. So when he heard about Tempest, something deep inside him shifted, like a locked door shaking for the first time in years. He didn't want the gold. And he wasn't looking for bragging rights. He wanted to see if there was still something real left inside him. Jake saddled his steady bay gelding Copper at dawn. His hands moved with slow, steady purpose as he packed a small bag. Coffee beans, hard bread, a bedroll. No fancy gear, no tricks. Just a quiet cowboy riding toward a challenge that felt bigger than money or pride. The landscape changed as he rode. Rolling grass turned into broken mesas. Cottonwoods lined dry creek beds like old friends whispering stories. Copper followed the trail without hurry, as if he sensed this wasn't just another day's work. By the time Jake reached the ridge overlooking Dry Creek Valley, the sun had burned off the morning chill. Below him, he saw a crowd near the Sterling Ranch corral. And he heard it, the distant thunder of hooves. Tempest. Even from half a mile away, the stallion's power echoed through the valley. Jake rode closer, tied Copper to a post, and slipped quietly among the crowd. A challenger was already inside the corral. A big man with silver spurs and a swagger heavy enough to bend the dust beneath his boots. He swung a rope. He boasted. He smirked. Tempest didn't care. The moment the rope touched his neck, the stallion exploded. He reared so high the sky seemed to tilt. He twisted, spun, kicked, and moved with such wild grace the crowd gasped as one. 30 seconds later, the challenger hit the dirt, dragging his pride with him. The crowd backed away. Some cursed. Some laughed nervously. Some shook their heads, saying the challenge was impossible. Only one person wasn't surprised. Catherine Sterling. She stood on the porch, calm as ever, eyes scanning the crowd. And when her gaze landed on Jake Morrison, something flickered inside them. Something that wasn't disappointment or annoyance. Recognition. She stepped down the porch steps, dust rising around her heels, and called out in a steady voice that cut through the murmurs. "Are you here to try your luck with my horse?" Jake tipped his hat. "Thinking about it, ma'am." And for the first time that day, a hush fell over the ranch. The crowd slowly backed away from the fence as Jake stepped toward the corral like a man walking into a church. He didn't swagger. He didn't boast. He didn't even look at the people watching him. His eyes were on Tempest alone. The stallion stood in the center of the corral, black coat shining like midnight, ears forward, breathing steady. He watched Jake with a sharp, knowing gaze, as if measuring the man before he made any move at all. Catherine Sterling crossed her arms and studied Jake the same way. Her voice carried across the yard. "What makes you different from the 25 men who already failed?" Jake took a slow breath. He wasn't a man who enjoyed talking about himself, but her question deserved a real answer. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "I don't think I am different. I'm not here to prove anything. I'm just here to see if that horse and I can understand each other." Something in Catherine's expression softened, just for a moment. She nodded toward the corral gate. "Then go on! But remember, if he throws you, you leave and don't come back." Jake nodded once. Fair enough. He didn't jump the fence. He didn't rush. He opened the gate slowly and slipped inside like he was stepping into someone else's home. The air shifted. The crowd held its breath. Even the wind seemed to pause. Jake stopped 10 feet from Tempest. He didn't reach out. He didn't try to rope him. He simply stood still, letting the stallion take him in. Tempest lifted his head, nostrils flaring. For a long moment, neither moved. Then Jake spoke in a calm voice that carried no fear. "Easy, partner. I'm not here to fight you." The stallion's ears twitched. Jake took one slow step closer. Tempest didn't flinch. He didn't rear. He only watched, eyes sharp like he was searching the man's soul. "You've had a rough time with fools," Jake murmured. "Men who came here wanting to own you instead of know you." Tempest took a step forward. The crowd murmured. Jake didn't move. His breathing stayed steady. His posture stayed loose, not threatening. He let Tempest come as close as the stallion wanted. Catherine watched from the fence, her fingers curled tight around the wood. Something about this moment felt familiar to her, old and aching. Her husband had once stood exactly like that, quiet, patient, honest. Jake opened his hand, palm up, but didn't push it toward the horse. He simply offered it. Tempest lowered his head. For the first time in 3 long years, the stallion brushed his warm breath over a stranger's fingers. A gasp moved through the crowd. Jake smiled softly. "That's it. No rush, no forcing. Just you and me figuring things out." The stallion stepped closer until Jake could touch him. Slowly, gently, Jake laid his palm on Tempest's neck. The stallion didn't pull away. Instead, he leaned into the touch like he had been waiting for it. Catherine's breath caught in her throat. Her eyes filled with something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. "Ma'am," Jake said without looking back, "I think he just needed someone to listen." "Then ride him," Catherine whispered, barely trusting her own voice. "If he'll let you." Jake took his time. Every move he made was slow and clear. He kept a hand on Tempest's neck as he stepped to the stallion's left side. Tempest shifted his weight but didn't protest. "Easy," Jake said softly. He slipped his foot into the stirrup and waited. No bucking. No warning signs. Jake swung his leg over and settled gently onto Tempest's back. The crowd exploded in whispers. Catherine pressed a hand to her mouth. Tempest stood still, not stiff, not frightened. Calm. Jake exhaled. "All right, partner, let's see what you want to do." He gave the stallion all the freedom to choose. And Tempest chose to move, first a careful step, then another, then a slow walk around the corral. Jake let the horse set the pace. Tempest's ears stayed forward, his steps smooth and sure. A minute passed, then two. Then Tempest shifted into a trot. Gentle, controlled, like he was showing Jake what he could do. Jake went with him easily, his body moving with the stallion's rhythm. "That's it," Jake whispered. "We're all right." The trot melted into a smooth canter. The wind rushed past them. Dust lifted behind Tempest's hooves. The stallion didn't buck, didn't twist, didn't fight. Instead, he ran with a joy no one had seen in years. Men at the fence stared speechless. Women covered their mouths. Even the children went quiet. 5 minutes passed. 7. The connection between man and horse felt like something alive, something rare, gentle, and powerful. When they finally slowed, Tempest walked to the center of the corral and stopped on his own, standing tall and calm beneath Jake's hands. "How long?" Jake called. Catherine looked at her pocket watch, her voice trembling. 10 minutes. The crowd erupted. Jake swung down slowly. Tempest followed his movement with a soft sound, as if asking him not to step too far away. Catherine walked into the corral. Amazement lit her face. "You did it," she whispered. "No man has since my husband." Jake wiped the sweat from his brow. "He did all the work, ma'am." "I just listened." She held out a small pouch filled with gold coins. "The $50. You earned it." Jake shook his head. "Keep it." This wasn't for money. Catherine stared at him, surprised. "Then what was it for?" Jake looked at Tempest, then at her. Maybe finding something worth staying for. Her breath caught again, this time not from shock, but from something warmer. And for the first time in years, the widow's eyes softened at a stranger. The days that followed moved like a quiet river, steady and full of change. Jake Morrison didn't ride away after taming Tempest. Instead, he stayed on, as if the ground beneath the Sterling Ranch had reached up and claimed him. Catherine gave him the small cabin by the north pasture. It wasn't fancy, but it had a porch that faced the sunrise, a warm stove, and a bed that didn't sag. For a man who had slept in line shacks and bunkhouses for years, it felt like a palace. Every morning, before the rest of the ranch woke, Jake stepped outside with a cup of coffee. Tempest always stood nearby, grazing at the edge of the meadow. Whenever Jake called his name, the stallion lifted his head and trotted over like he had been waiting for that voice. Some of the ranch hands joked that Tempest liked Jake more than he liked oats. Maybe it was true. Jake and Tempest worked the ranch together, rounding up strays, checking fence lines, or simply riding the hills with the silent understanding only true partners shared. The stallion trusted Jake enough to respond to the smallest shift of weight, the lightest touch. With every passing day, their bond grew stronger, but something else was growing too. Catherine watched them from her porch each morning with a soft smile. She had run the ranch alone for 3 years, 3 long years of cold nights, empty dinners, and the kind of loneliness that settled into a person's bones. She never complained, never faltered, but the weight of it had shaped her like stone. Now, for the first time since her husband died, she wasn't alone. Jake helped with every chore, every broken gate, every stubborn calf. He worked quietly, with a steady patience that made the ranch feel alive again. And Catherine saw it, all of it, the way he handled losses with calm acceptance, the way he talked to horses like they were old friends, the way he stood beside her without asking anything in return. One evening, after a long day of sorting cattle, Jake walked to the house with tired steps and dust on his shirt. Catherine waited on the porch with 2 mugs of hot coffee and the gentle glow of lantern light behind her. "Sit with me a while," she said. He did. They didn't talk at first. They just watched the sun sink behind the western hills, turning the sky gold and orange. "I never thanked you properly," Catherine said quietly. "For what, ma'am?" "For proving I wasn't wrong about Tempest, for giving him what he needed, and for giving me a little hope again." Jake looked at her, surprised by how open her voice sounded. "I didn't do much," he said. "All I did was listen." "That's more than most men know how to do," she answered, her eyes soft as dusk. Jake hesitated, then spoke a truth he had never said aloud. "I came here empty. I didn't expect anything. I didn't want anything. But now, I don't feel empty anymore." Catherine's breath caught. She turned to face him fully, the lantern light catching the faint sadness and strength in her eyes. "You found what you were missing," she whispered. Jake swallowed. "I think I found you." The moment hung between them like warm air before rain. Then Catherine reached out and took his hand. Her touch was steady, warm, and filled with all the quiet courage of a woman who had lost deeply, yet still dared to hope. Jake leaned forward, and she met him halfway. Their kiss was gentle, careful, the kind of kiss that didn't need rush or fire because it held sincerity instead. Tempest lifted his head from the pasture and gave a soft call, almost as if he sensed the change in the air. After that evening, everything shifted. Jake and Catherine moved through their days side by side, not just partners in work, but in something tender and growing. Their conversations stretched longer, their laughter came easier. Their evenings on the porch became a quiet ritual neither wanted to break, and as spring gave way to summer, the ranch changed too. With Jake's help, the herd grew stronger. Tempest became the foundation of a new breeding line, colts and fillies that carried his spirit but learned early what true partnership looked like. More cowboys came seeking work. One young man rode in one afternoon with a tired horse and a tired heart, asking for a chance to start over. Jake recognized that look. He'd worn it once himself. Catherine offered the young man a job without hesitation. "We help those who need it," she told Jake afterward. "It's what this ranch was meant to be." Jake nodded, knowing she was right. And so the Sterling Ranch grew, stronger, kinder, fuller. Months passed. Then, one cool, autumn morning, with golden leaves falling behind them and Tempest standing proudly at the fence, Jake looked at Catherine with a steady certainty he had never felt before. "Marry me," he said, voice quiet but firm. "I don't have much to give except my hands, my heart, and a promise that I'll stand beside you every day I've got left." Quote, Catherine didn't need time to think. She smiled the softest smile he had ever seen. "Yes, Jake," she whispered. "Yes." They married on the front porch under a sky filled with cottonwood leaves. Only a few neighbors stood as witnesses. Tempest stood at the fence watching them, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, the stallion reared once, a proud, joyful salute to a new beginning. The years that followed were kind. Jake became not just Catherine's husband, but her partner, her strength, her peace. Together they built a ranch that people spoke about with respect. A ranch where horses were understood, where riders were patient, and where lost souls found second chances. Tempest lived out his life as a legend, never broken, never conquered, but partnered in the truest sense. His colts carried his spirit across the territory, each one a reminder of the day a lonely cowboy found his purpose. And through it all, Jake and Catherine stood side by side, proving that sometimes the strongest things in life aren't wild or fierce. Sometimes they're simple: trust, patience, love, and the courage to try again. Their stories spread far beyond Dry Creek Valley, carried in whispers and campfire tales. Folks said the widow found her cowboy, the stallion found his rider, and a lonely man found a home he never expected. Because in the end, it wasn't about being the strongest or the bravest. It was about being real.